Yay.
Dorothea, hello.
Hi. Hi, Dorothea.
Good evening, Dorothea.
Sorry about that. Takes me longer to get hooked up.
That's okay. We're glad you're here. We now officially have a quorum. And so I think if, oh, Bonnie was there. Did you?
I was just going to say you're ready to go.
Okay, great. And I know Dana will jump back on here, but we'll start with taking the roll. Kathy Montgomery.
Yeah.
And Dorothea Ferris is here, and Jason Janes is here. That's our quorum. And Susanna, I did not see a written version of the minutes.
I didn't have a chance to get those out, and
Okay.
I know there's a place where they're stored online, so Bonnie can probably
Okay.
give us that info, and I'll try to do that.
So we no longer do written minutes for the other boards. We do recordings as the minutes, and that was accepted by our attorneys that I have them available online for the public and in a Laserfish, which is our storage to store, kind of files that we keep. It is also there too. So Susanna, it is up to you if you want to continue to do a brief minutes for.
I think it's helpful since we don't meet that often. It's helpful to have a reminder. So I'll try to catch up on that with tonight's minutes for you before our next meeting.
Okay, thank you. And I know we had some informal conversations and some discussion about things like signage.
Yeah.
Temporary kind of structures and elements. Were there any comments from commission members? And then, Susanna, because we don't have a document, is there anything we need to do to approve those formally, or any kind of step we need to take?
Just discussion items. I conveyed our discussion on the pop-ups to Joanna, and she was all fine with that. We need to come up with a little process for, a semi or a short-term approval for a pop-up. And that's kind of in the works. Then in terms of the signage, no, we didn't have to take any action on that. We just needed to have that discussion. And similarly with the cattle property that we talked about. So we don't really have anything on that.
Great, thank you.
I just wondered, can that information be included in the next minute so we don't just
Yes.
lose it again? Thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other topics or comments before we move to the tabled application?
Nope.
All right, I think we're ready to move into that.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Susanna.
So this is a continuation of the application that we reviewed last meeting. And at the last meeting, there were several key points that we discussed. The stone-based materials, the picture bay window, the garage, west elevation roof pitch, solar panels, floodplain, landscape, and actual floor area calculations. We decided that we were fine with the picture window, fine with the garage west elevation roof pitch, fine with the future at some point solar panels. I did receive information on the floodplain and the floor area calculations, so those things are off the list. I think we also decided we were fine with the landscape design the way it had been presented at the meeting, and as long as that's the general sensibility of how the landscape is going to turn out, we don't need a lot of additional information on that. The big area of a concern were the dormers, and the applicant has submitted a revised dormer design. the design still requires exceptions from 3 of our exempt dormer guidelines. And I'm going to just kind of read through this so I get it all. The applicant did revise the dormer roof pitch to, I believe, a 10 and 12. There was some discrepancy on the drawings, but I wanted to just make sure that I've got that right. We also, I'm sorry, decided that the way the garage had been presented with the dormers and that those roof pitches were acceptable. So we're just talking about the main residence. Gotta be on the right memo here, sorry. So they did revise to the dormers to a 5 and 12 pitch. I would like to make a condition that a plate height for the dormer is does not exceed 8 feet, because it wasn't clear whether that 5 and 12 pitch got us to an 8-foot plate height or if it was still higher. And Dana can confirm that when we get there. They did pull the face of the dormer back to 5'6", I believe, or 5'8", not including the overhang, which helps to alleviate some of the issue of that the dormer becoming the principal facade as opposed to the 12-12 roof facade. I think it does improve the look of the building from the boulevard. I didn't really come down on a recommendation. The dormers are still over and above the 30%. They're still in the 40 to 50% of the footprint. The dormers still take off from the roof without the 18-inch separation, and they still do not get to that 1/3 mark of the distance back from the facade. At the last meeting, we talked about the actual technical issues with reducing the dormer ridge height, and the applicant can probably give us a little more information on that. Otherwise, the only other thing that it appears on the elevations that the plans have been flipped or shifted, and I didn't receive a revised site plan, so I'm hoping the applicant can address that as well. Pretty much that is where we are. And when we make a motion, we will just need to specify why we're okay with exempting these particulars of the exempt dormer guidelines. So I will hand it over back to you, Jason.
All right. And was there anything in addition that, Dana, that you would like to talk about in terms of the modifications? I think that would be next, was updates from the applicant.
Yeah, I'd love to share my screen so that I can go through the presentation. What I did was I maintained what I showed you all last time, moved some things to the end that aren't relevant, but we can always go to them if anyone wants to revisit anything. So let me share my screen. Can you all see this?
Yep.
Yes.
So let me make sure I move this little guy. Okay. So as Susanna said, I put a little summary of what we did from our last meeting. We increased the setback of the primary residence dormer, and I'll show you sort of how that worked out. It did increase from about 3 feet 2 inches to 5 feet 8 inches from front facade to dormer facade, not including overhangs. We increased the pitch of the roof from a 312 to a 512. And I'll just jump. I kept the old diagram right here so you could see that it increased pretty considerably. We removed the stone base from both the garage CDU and the primary residence. And we did confirm with Phoenix House, the prefab company, that the dormer must originate at the ridge in order for their building system to work. We are hoping that enough of you sort of value both the efficiency and the economic constraints on this property to let that be maintained. This is a decision that if we could wave a magic wand and let everything work in terms of economics, time constraints, and the energy efficiency goals, and also allow for that 18-inch step down, it would not be an issue for us, but it really has to do with a combination of thermal envelope and structural integrity of having kind of a very strong thermal envelope. What that means is that the assembly for the structure is quite large. And so when you shift it off that ridge line, you end up having to create a secondary structure, which creates the thermal break, which is totally against kind of their ethos as a prefab company and really what we're trying to do. So I'll get more into that when we look at the section, but this is the diagram page. This just reiterates what I just said here in the center, but the garage CDU is staying the same with the exception of the stone base. And I'm going to just quickly jump ahead and Susanna, we did represent this back when, I'm jumping to the end, with the flipped floor plan, but it was still in progress. We were still finalizing some things with Holy Cross Energy. We have since finalized those things. And so this is still maintaining, but what you're going to notice is that we had to shift this little triangle of deck out of here, and it's now over here. So now I'm going to flip back. This is our updated site plan. You can see that there's now stair access coming in a very annoying little triangle up to a reduced deck. It's less than ideal, but it keeps us outside of all of Holy Cross Energy's clearance requirements. Now, I also should say a different client, a different owner of this property would spend the $20,000 to just relocate what is a insane location for an electrical pole. But, you know, we're looking at, you know, a multi-generational family really trying to do this as economically as possible. That is an anomaly in Pickens County, and we understand that. But we are going to certain design decisions to keep the electrical pole because it's not, it's cost prohibitive to move it. So just to kind of give you guys the scale in which we're working with economically here, you know, I have other clients who this would be like a blink of the eye to just, well, let's just move the pole. We're not taking any of these decisions flippantly. So I just wanted to share that. So we came up with a design that works with the clearance requirements. It's a little, you know, awkward, but it does keep all the circulation on the back face of the property, which we felt versus trying to move things around and have a bigger impact to Redstone Boulevard. We're kind of putting, I would call like the anomalies or the compromises as much to the rear as possible. So that was also intentional. So going back now to the diagrams, because I think this is really the meat of our conversation. By increasing that pitch, what we did, so Susanna, to answer your question, the sill height is higher than 8 feet. If that is a condition, it does start to get a little tight in terms of the transition and usable space. But I think, you know, at this point, we definitely want to keep the project moving forward. This puts the plate height at 9 feet, so it's 1 foot up. We are trying to create as much spaciousness in that dormer area as possible because of the tight constraints when we have this. And so currently this is at a 9-foot plate height. It sets our windows and doors at 8 feet. Our windows at 8 feet, doors are at 7 feet. So I think that is up for discussion for sure. And then the confirming of the ridge height, I kind of had that feeling. That's why I asked before we left, because we did have a pretty substantial conversation with the prefab company. And I should say offsite built. They call themselves a prefab company. There's some language stuff there. So I'll just use prefab, but it's offsite construction company. They, prior to coming to you initially, we did work really hard to see if they could work with us. But I was like, all right, this is important. We're going to ask again. And I let them know the importance of it. And they came back and said, this is not how this system works. This system works through a model of high efficiency, creating a thermal envelope that is unbroken. When you're adding large scale structure, you break the thermal envelope. So that was their response. We did ask again, and then I was like, are you sure? Like I even did like the one extra, and they were like, yeah, you can ask it 16 different ways. This isn't how it would work. We even thought about, okay, what if the dormers were something that could be built later? It added, a pretty substantial cost. So again, what we're weighing here are 3 things. We're weighing the cost of construction. We're weighing the speed of construction, which is one of the reasons we're going both from a cost and speed standpoint with this company. They are based out of Colorado. That feels good. That feels like the right move in terms of working with one of these companies. And then we're weighing the energy efficiency. So we're really hoping that those constraints that are partially self-imposed, partially reality for these clients, like a big reality, and then obviously the energy efficiency requirements of Picken County. And there are like ways around some of that, but it's not, in my mind, it's not really meeting the intent of the code to use some of their loopholes. So anyway, we are sort of stuck. The alternative is that, we go with a traditionally built home, and with the cost of labor and materials, it would make this economically impossible for these clients to build on this site. We did take a look at that because they are motivated, but there's also a reality in terms of their ability to build within downtown Redstone. So floor area is updated. That's been sent. The main level, the only change to the garage CDU is the stair access. There are no changes to the interior of the building. We did reduce the depth of this front porch to work with the Holy Cross energy clearance requirements, but it was pretty minor. The upper level, we brought the dormer to align, and I had this idea even when we were in the meeting, but to align with this bathroom. So essentially the bathroom edge right here where this tub is will be within a tighter ceiling constraint. We had it originally aligned with this closet, but I think, this was a reasonable and programmatically simple solution to push it back to this level. It does make the kind of bed nook a little tighter, but I think that still works for this family quite well. We also reduced the covered deck back here by a few inches to also tighten up those clearances for Holy Cross Energy. That was less than ideal, but it does mean that our roof projection on the back decreases. So in terms of the area of roof to dormer, because of that pullback on the sort of backyard side, we didn't achieve as much as we could have had we not done that, in terms of percentages. The 512, we did look at 412. And at the end of the day, there were a few reasons for this, but I liked the proportion that we were left with, between the 1012 and the 512 in terms of this little bit. When it becomes like a sliver, I don't know, there's something about it proportionally that didn't feel as good, to be honest. And we wanted to have it be enough of a change that you all would feel comfortable with it. So, you know, bringing it down to a 612 can happen, but this is where we landed just from a few different, you know, iterations and explorations. I also liked the proportions on kind of the west and east elevation, specifically the west elevation where we've got the overhang. It just felt like a nice proportion between above window and below window. Like, so anyway, these were conscious decisions with sort of how we landed there. The removal of the stone was an easy one. And then the CDU, as I said, doesn't really change except for a kind of, you know, less than ideal stair access, but this won't be visible from Redstone Boulevard. So I don't think it should matter too much. And then the site plan is still in progress, I should say. The planting locations and things like that are still being fine-tuned. We're working with Sopris Engineering, and then a local landscape contractor. So some of that is a little bit still in flux, but we'll work with Susanna to get that finalized prior to building permit. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think everything else you've already seen. So I'll go back to the diagram page because I feel like this gives a nice overview of what kind of the sticking points are. And I will mute myself and I guess turn it back to Jason.
And Jason, I have a couple other little things.
Okay.
The stair on the back of the garage is not in conflict with the guidelines, so that's fine. The other thing that I recommended is that to keep, this is so minor, but the flue for the at the ridge line, to keep that as minimal as possible and not trying to make it something. I thought that we should suggest that having a metal flue in that location would be appropriate, as opposed to boxing it out or putting a fancy cap on it or something.
Got it. Do we have any, thank you, Susanna. I was going to ask if there were other outstanding kind of
the one other thing I would like is just to confirm what the roof pitches are, because the elevations have two different set of, one says 1212, one says 1012, one says 512 on the dormer, and one says 412 on the dormer on the main house. So I just want to confirm for the record which
Yes. So they are the elevation, this front elevation of a 1012. Oh, I see that. I missed that, Susanna. They are, I will double check actually while we're, I'll stop share for a quick sec because I have the file open. I missed that back. I think they're 1012 and 512. That's the one I've been going off.
Like that was in your head, but I just want to be sure which one it is.
Yeah, the 1012 versus 1212 though, I need to double check that because as I look at that, I'm like, that might actually be 1212.
Yeah.
Let me double check.
Great, thanks.
They were labeled that way in the prior application too, 10 and 12 separately. Yeah. So there's some of that was a holdover. Kathy, Dorothea, any questions about the changes that you've seen?
I believe they addressed the issues we discussed last time. And, you know, the code is so specific for our needs. You know, all the rest of it, you know, what they could do to save money and all that is interesting. But really, I want to focus on the fact that the modification of the Redstone Code to address all those needs is what this committee has got to focus on. And I appreciate the focusing on those issues that were identified at the last meeting to meet the code for meeting the criteria of the Redstone Historic Preservation. I think obviously in the back of my mind is this: the historic credibility of Redstone is unique, and that's what this committee has always focused on, is to make sure we maintain that integrity. And I appreciate the focus that Susanna has and the board has in making sure that we don't lose that intensity of protection for Redstone. It is more unique than we ever thought it was. As you look around at the construction, for example, in downtown, enter to the Crystal River Valley is not quite the existence that I thought it would have at this time in history. So I appreciate that. And that is our focus. You know, I'm glad they're saving money. I'm glad they're getting room for their tub and their bed, but that's not the focus. The focus is in the code, and thank you for modifying it and adhering to it. And thanks, Susanna. I'm done.
Thank you, Dorothea. Kathy, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Okay. I just want to recognize Rochelle turned on her camera. Hi, Rochelle. Welcome. We were all looking at the images, so don't know when you arrived, but thanks for being here.
And I will clarify that it is actually 12:12. So that
It's
one,
12:12.
yeah,
Okay.
that one is the correct one, which
And,
is
and 5:12 on the dormer.
in 5:12 on the dormer.
Okay. I just have a couple of clarifying questions. The first one may seem a little abstract, but it'll be important later. Dana, are there specific requirements in either the development code or the building codes related to the space between the two buildings, the garage and the main residence?
There is not currently any requirements. We did work really hard to separate them as much as humanly possible, specifically with the setback limitations and then the clearance requirements to the electrical pole in the back. And I even put in the most recent one, I drew in a parking space. And essentially what I did was I made sure there was at least a standard, 8.5 by 18 parking space requirement, zone.
Right. Yeah. And so from corner to corner, and wouldn't be the footprint, it would be the column of that roof, the back porch roof, to the nearest corner of the garage. Approximately what is that dimension? I'm just trying to visualize it a little bit.
Give me a second.
Yeah, no problem.
So from the column, there's a column that supports that back deck to the roof line. We are maintaining 10 feet. So it feels bigger, but we had a requirement of 10 feet for Holy Cross to access the pole. So we used that as the minimum. And then from there, that's happening on 2 levels, but the clear space at the ground is larger than that.
Okay, thank you. The other question is, and I know we looked at this last time, but what are the uses on the second floor of the house under those dormers?
We can look at the floor plan again, but it's bedroom and bathroom, or
Okay.
bedroom and closet.
Okay, so you were pointing out moving from the kind of the spring point of the dormer over the closet back to over the tub on the one side. Got it.
Correct.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we were trying to make it so that the interior of the space, although impacted by those really steep dormers, kind of made sense, like you were tucking a closet in there or
Yep.
a tub, like so that at least it wasn't, head knocker central.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Those those are my questions. And unless that's prompted other questions from HPC members, I think we just need to make sure we ask for comments from members of the public if any are present.
We
Okay,
do not have any members of public.
thank you, Bonnie. All right, I think that moves us into HPC comments next. Dorothea, do you have anything that you want to add from your previous comment? Oh, if you're speaking, I'm sorry, you're muted. I thought. Okay, good. All right, we got a thumbs up. If there's something else that you need to add, we'll come back around after Kathy, and then I've got a couple of things. Kathy, do you have anything you want to add?
I like the adjustments that have been made. And I appreciate what Rochelle and Gina are trying to do here. And I like it. Anyway, that's me.
All right. Thanks, Kathy. A couple of things for me. Number one, I would jump right to the flu. I completely agree with the suggestion that it be simple. I go back to my experience of when we built our house. We were concerned about the finish of the metal flue for our wood burning fireplace. We committed to putting a patina on it. We actually got an oxidizing material to put on it, and it basically ruined it. It looked terrible. So I don't know that there's a whole lot other than just trying to minimize it that we can do. And so I agree with Susanna's suggestion or recommendation that that'd be the way to do it. You know, kind of anything else is just going to make it bigger and more visible. So I'm completely on board with that. And then as it relates to the other elements and items, I agree with what I think Dorothea was driving at, which is very sympathetic to the energy goals, very sympathetic to the budget constraints, which get more and more real every day, and that we have to be at a place where we feel comfortable saying we would approve this under kind of any circumstance, given the factors at play and given our review of the guidelines. And I also would echo what Dorothea said about the modifications, that it's very clear that you took them to heart. And I, for one, really appreciate seeing those changes. I think they've made a significant difference, quite honestly, on the scale of these, what are frankly much smaller houses than you typically see out in the community. And I know that mine on the boulevard has some very similar characteristics. Reducing that plate height and reducing the scale of the second story, to me, brings these buildings kind of into proportion with themselves. Otherwise, they end up looking kind of tall and tippy and ungainly. And so that, while the plate height requirements and the dormer requirements have very specific historic preservation kind of reasoning, I also think there's a scale of proportion kind of mass component to it, that as that plate height comes down and gets a little bit closer to being in relationship with the header of the window, quite frankly, I think the buildings feel a whole lot better, and this has made a huge difference. And what Susanna put in her memo that I think is really important that we talk about is, if we're moving to a place where we're going to be interested in saying, like we think we're there, or we think that we're close and we'd like to move forward, to not, even though an individual application doesn't set a precedent, but to not just completely open the door to having two-story buildings on any future application and having to defend the integrity of the guidelines. I was looking very closely at things like the lot constraints, and initially I wasn't so sure that the lot constraints were a huge factor, because there are other quite small lots, in quite narrow lots on the boulevard. But when you take some simple measurements, the overhead lines in the back are significantly more constraining than in most cases. And it largely has to do with the rake of that kind of second line that runs across to the neighboring cabin. And that pulls in 15 or 20 feet of usable lot space. When you go from the 30-foot setback to a 10 feet off of that power line, it's a very constrained envelope. And so not only is the envelope vertically constrained by the plate height requirements, it's horizontally constrained by the the overhead lines. And I'm sympathetic to that as an existing condition because it's very real, the cost associated with undergrounding or moving those lines. And so I do think that's a mitigating factor in this particular circumstance. And I asked the question about the building separation because I had looked at that in the site plan from the previous version. And honestly, 10 feet's pretty cozy in terms of building relationship from one to another. So saying, push the buildings together and make the footprint a little bit bigger and bring the mass down might sound really easy, but I also think that the building spacing is about as tight as it can be and still remain functional and reasonable. So I think the two buildings are occupying the buildable portion of the envelope in a way that feels very appropriate to me. And having those as two separate masses that do have distinct separation, and then trying to mitigate for some of the other the other issues, I guess, associated with the access around the north side to get to the for Holy Cross to be able to get to the power lines. There's just a whole lot of factors at play that are kind of pushing on the building envelope. And so that feels to me like there are some constraints that likely don't exist on other lots on the boulevard. I want to look at my notes and make sure. So I would call that a mitigating site factor. The shape of the lot, the limitations of the building envelopes, and the setbacks create an impact, including the overhead lines. And then I also think that the design of the building also creates some mitigation, where you look at if you looked at a dormer that exceeded the requirements on effectively a two-story element that did not have any other articulation, that would look like one thing. A wraparound front porch that creates a shadow line, a first story mass with a shed roof that basically matches the underside of that kind of dormer form goes a long way to breaking up that vertical wall plane. And to me, that is critically important. So I think that's a mitigating design factor. That's actually two. It was the covered and wraparound porch, and then the single story mass. The other kind of mitigating design factor is extending a roof line over the back balcony, which it increases the apparent total roof area of the house, but it's not a very big house to begin with. And so to me, what it really is doing is increasing the apparent percentage of roof line compared to the dormer. And I do think as a design move, that goes a long ways towards it not feeling like all dormer and no roof. So that, along with the other design changes that have been made, I think are significant in going towards something that I'm starting to feel a whole lot better about, like saying with integrity of the guidelines that I would be supportive of. I would say that if it's possible to get that dormer spring point to 8 feet, is particularly in a concession where we can't get off of the ridge line, I would feel pretty strongly about that. And it's just from my own experience in my house of having spring points at 6 feet and having bathtubs and showers underneath steep dormer lines. We did the same thing, like tucking some of those spaces into the little nooks and corners. And, being a 6 foot tall person and having some of those kinds of spaces, even internal, where where our trusses had to land on shear walls, we actually have some internal spring points that you don't see from outside just to make the thing work, that are very, very low. And I don't know, some people would say it feels cramped and others would say it feels quaint, but that's what we had to do to make it work. And so I would encourage, we know we can't come off the ridge line. Let's get the spring point of the dormer down where it needs to be. But otherwise, I would be supportive of moving forward with that, with the 8 foot kind of proposal or suggestion that Susanna put on the table. And I think the other changes have really kind of addressed the issues otherwise as I see them. So that's, I think I've covered everything that I put in my notes, but those are my comments. I really feel like it's come a long way. I think it looks fantastic.
Can I just make a little comment as well? I do want the rest of the members to strongly consider the 8-foot restriction, because if we don't have something like that in the record of this discussion, I'm afraid that we won't be able to avoid the 10-foot plate height, you know, the de facto full second floor problem on other projects that we review. And I think that certainly the energy efficiency is and the constructability and the budget concerns are all important. I think we should specifically mention the location of the Holy Cross pole and the impacts of that on the site, and the fact that we are getting a smaller footprint overall, with making the concession that there can be more functional space up above. But I feel pretty strongly that 8-foot plate height is kind of something that we can go back to as a touchstone for other applications that come in with similar circumstances.
Can I did open the file since we were talking, and so I could tell you exactly where it is, because I was doing that from memory. If that's okay, just so we know what we're talking about. Can you all see my screen? So this is the real 3D model. So we're at a 512 right now. And the spring point from here, you can see how it's a really big insulated roof, and it thins out as it goes to the exterior. We're at 8 foot, let's call it 8'6". It's 8'5" and 5/8 to this spring point here. We've got a 9-foot ceiling height for the lower level, partially to relate to the garage heights. I find that really challenging as a designer if they're different. But yeah, so we're already under, I had said 9 feet. We're at 8'5" and 5/8 exactly. And I did look if we increased it just for round numbers. Here, I'll just bring that so you guys can see me do it. If we brought this down to 612, we end up with a 7'9" interior spring point, which I think is too low. Personally, especially when I wanted to make sure you guys saw that this does step down pretty considerably. It gives a better and more historic fascia on the exterior. So we felt like that was an important transition to make. But yeah, just if that's helpful at all in the discussion to understand really what we're currently proposing. And if we were to land on 8 feet, then the pitch of this roof would probably be somewhere between a 512 and a 612, which gets a little funny with documentation, but it's not impossible.
Well, I think that visually it's closer to a 9-foot plate height from the outside right now.
Yes.
Yeah. So unfortunately, all the more reason to bring it down a little bit more.
Bummer.
In my opinion.
Yes. Yeah. And, it is a small house. Getting a little bit of space in it, I don't think is unreasonable. But, we're here for your comments.
They say that when they start digging under the houses in Aspen, that, well, we need more space. And so we're destroying a historic community by doing that. I'm not going to let that happen in Redstone. To my ability, whatever I have to say about it. So thanks for recognizing that. And I appreciate what Susanna just said also. We've got to do that. It's a little smaller. That's the way it is when you live in a historic small town.
Yep, I apologize.
I
I'm
support
camera's off, but I'm still
what you
here.
were saying.
I'm just switching over to my other device. I do feel like we're awfully close to that, and that without a significant compromise, hitting that number feels pretty defensible for the 3 points of concession on those dormer moves.
And I support what Jason had to say, and you have language and vocabulary that I can't even justify and make sense with. So I appreciate what his comments were and Susanna's evaluation. And I'm comfortable with what's being presented and with the attitude Dana had to accommodate the needs of the community.
Okay, shall we try to formulate a motion?
Yes. Someone with better skills than mine will have to do that.
Well, I made a recommendation that we move to approve. We need to specifically grant the exceptions to the exempt dormer guidelines of roof coverage, 1/3 setback rule, and ridgeline rule. And we should base those exceptions on the specifics of the this site, which include the location of the Holy Cross pole, the fact that the small footprint of the house is consistent with the guidelines and desirable in the historic district, and that the interior plate height be the dormers be restricted to 8 feet. That would be my recommendation. Also, that the metal flue is appropriate for the roof. And I think that those were the only specifics. The other thing was just that we get a complete and corrected drawing set for the record, including the site plan, roof pitches, floor to floor heights, plate and ridge heights, and dormer dimensions. Just so we have that for the record, since a lot of different things have been represented over the course of these 2 meetings. And then our standard condition that any substantive changes from this approval need to be resubmitted to staff for review or forward to the commission. So that was the essence of my recommended motion.
Can we get
You're
away with saying so
for-
moved?
So moved. Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. And I guess because we're online, Susanna, do we need to kind of do it roll?
Bonnie should weigh in on that. I can't remember what we did last time.
It would be helpful because in the recording, I can't tell who first
Okay.
and who seconded. So if you could call out your name, that'd be great.
Okay, let's do it kind of roll wise. Kathy?
This is Kathy and I vote yes.
Thank you, Kathy. Dorothea?
Dorothea, vote yes.
Thank you, Dorothea. This is Jason and I vote yes as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Dana and Rochelle.
Yeah, thank you all. I'm glad we got here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right,
for-
have a good evening.
Good job, Dana.
Bye, Patrick. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, since Jason's on the move, I will introduce the next case, which is 292 Redstone Boulevard, which is an addition to the store building on the boulevard. And as soon as I get my wad of paper organized here, I will run through the application. The applicant is proposing to add about 790 square feet to the back of the historic store building. It's connecting to several smaller additions that have been made to the back of the building over time, and is a low pitched shed roof just to expand the functionality of the store and add some spaces that can be connected to the exterior, it looks like, for food service. So the application that I got originally was fairly minimal on the description of the addition. So since then, Patrick has provided slightly more information, which should help our discussion. My main concerns are the character of the addition being kind of just another sloped roof tack on to the back of the building. And I felt like this was an opportunity to maybe make a design that was a little bit more in keeping with the guidelines in terms of more appropriate roof shapes, scale and massing and separation from the historic building, and other elements that are in our guidelines that talk about additions. In this case, we have an addition that is considered a standard addition as opposed to a small addition. And that kind of kicks in more of a separation between the two volumes. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit. Then we have in this particular proposal, we also have in the area of scale and massing and roofs and dormers, a preference for roof shapes that are more similar to the historic building that's being added on to. We have a desire for doors and windows that are more similar to what is seen on the historic building. In this case, the historic building has a lot of window alterations already, but the predominant window form on a building like this would be a more vertically proportioned window. Let's see. I also added a few other things that haven't been addressed by the application because there are things that we have an interest in general, which are how the dumpsters are handled and how the parking is handled. We have kind of a policy of asking that some of those conditions on the site, when somebody comes in with an application to do a substantial piece of work on the property, that we include repairing some of the things that have been done in the past by getting an enclosure for the dumpster and kind of reining in the amount of gravel that covers the site. We don't have any real information on that for this particular application. So essentially, I asked for the applicant to go back and restudy some of that front yard parking, the dumpster location, some of the mechanical equipment that's mounted near the front of the building, and ultimately whether there was the possibility of a different roof shape, which I think is the primary concern that I have about this particular addition, and the fact that it just extends the glommed-on additions on the north side of the building without making a distinction or repairing any of those existing conditions. Again, also restudying the windows. And one of the other issues is there is currently, I believe, kind of a tough shed located on the site, and kind of what the status of that is, whether that's relocated or removed. So those were my questions for the applicant and my concerns. And I don't know if Jason is kind of with us, or I can just turn it over to Patrick to kind of fill in the blanks for us.
I'm here, but I think that's great.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Susanna. I'm Patrick Raleigh with Clausen Raleigh Associates, and I'm joined by Lane Calabro, who is the architectural designer on this. So we will kind of, Lane and I will kind of tag team the presentation that I have, but let me, if I may share my screen. And we'll go through this presentation and try to make it as painless as possible. So again, this is 292 Redstone Boulevard. I love the Boulevard. I think of the Boulevard of Fame or any of those things when I start thinking about it. But this is the general store. And as Susanna has pointed out, this is a rather utilitarian addition to the rear of the historic resource for expansion of the kitchen facilities that they have and some other, back of house additions that will support the commercial use of the general store.
Pardon the interruption, but it's like kind of flashing in and out, and I'm getting a lot of black screen on my end. I don't know if that's just for me or is everyone?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let's see. Let me try to get out. I have it's giving me a weird presentation view that wasn't happening before. Is that a little bit better? No?
No.
Doing it. You can just,
Is that a little bit better?
That's
Yes.
better. That's staying.
Good. So a bit of a background on this is, I'm sorry, now I need to try to change my view. So a bit of background on this, that this matter was actually exempted from land use review by the Community Development Department. Exemptions are utilized by ComDev to, allow greater time for more detailed or more involved land use applications. Generally, it's small additions like we are proposing here, additions and activities that don't impinge upon geologic hazards or, require additional studies. So we were given a exemption from the land use review process. Now I can't forward. There we go. Now we have a number of exemption conditions of the exemptions that have kind of dictated how we have approached this project. So of course we can't disturb slopes greater than 30%, which we aren't. We're on a generally flat town site lot, as everyone is familiar with. The exterior materials were by staff were told us to match the current materials or whatever recommendation that you provide to us. And we look forward to having a discussion about those materials and responding to your suggestions. There are 2 large spruce trees in the rear of the property behind the general store. And our addition would be, will be in the location of one of these trees. So we have to remove one tree. And staff, community development staff said, if you can, let's try to keep the other one. So that also kind of dictates how we have approached the location and configuration of this addition, is to maintain as many of the trees as we can. We have provided a landscape plan in the packet, and I'll take a look at that in a second, where we mitigate for the loss of the tree that is coming down.
Yeah.
The staff has said that a non-contributing addition should be removed. Lane, you had a question about this to me, and I have to confess, I believe it might be the tough shed or some other of the ramshackle, additions that have been made through the years. So, we will be cleaning up the rear of the property with this addition, and the idea is to kind of get everything in a more orderly fashion. Condition of approval that we need to comply with the underlying VC zone district requirements, and be, very importantly here, I want to stress this, be minimally visible from the Redstone Boulevard and not impact any character defining features. So that has kind of dictated, again, how we have approached this addition, to provide a very low slung, quiet addition to the rear of the property that doesn't take away from the historic character and integrity of the resource. Continuing on, the staff has required that's why we're here tonight is we need a resolution from you all indicating that the building plans have been reviewed and that we comply with the relevant guidelines. We need to provide a detailed revegetation landscape plan, which I have mentioned, which would be mitigation for the one spruce tree that we are proposed removing. Again, if the configuration of the addition is modified or the separation changes, that will impact the second spruce tree, and that's a fairly large spruce tree that would have a greater impact if it is lost. And then we need to provide representations, of course, that the colors are indigenous and earth tone materials. And colors. So we will be discussing that a little bit in depth, but that's generally the overall exemption that we received from community development. This is the landscape site plan overall, just to help everyone be oriented. Of course, Redstone Boulevard, the boulevard is at the top of the page. Oh, I'm sorry. As at the top of the page, the existing structure is indicated here, what everyone appreciates as the general store, and then our proposed addition to the rear in the backyard of the existing structure. Here are the two trees that we were talking. This is the tree that will be removed. It falls right in line with the new addition, but then there's the second larger tree that we hope to retain on site. The additional trees, just lost my pointer, where'd it go? The additional trees that we are utilizing for mitigation of the tree that we'd be taking down, we have proposed to ring the northern and eastern boundary in the backyard. There's some hope that eventually the backyard can be developed as an amenity space for the commercial uses, some type of a patio space or a garden area where people can go and enjoy the outdoors. So we're trying to anticipate, with our mitigation plantings of ringing that area while we can still keep a southern exposure and that area to be pleasant to enjoy. So with that, I will turn it over to Lane to discuss the architecturals, and Lane, just give me a nod or an indication that you want me to advance the slide.
You're muted.
That might help. So these are just, the perspective views, Susanna, I saw in your feedback that you wanted to see a little more detail added. So I did some additional work on the model, adding hatches just to kind of more realistically represent kind of the trim conditions, the siding conditions of what we're proposing as well as what is existing there. You can go ahead, Patrick.
I guess I would like to point out too, so this is the north perspective, but it's really kind of the western facade. This is the front of the general store as we appreciate it, with some non-historic additions, then with the addition that we're considering tonight here in the back. This view is south, looking, is really kind of quartering the parking lot. Is here is the wraparound deck on the store, and here's the addition. You can see this wraparound deck again, what we appreciate as the general store, and then what the view in the rear yard would look like. Just wanted to help orient at that. Sorry.
Thank you. No, thank you. So here we've kind of defined what is the existing historic building, and that's grayed out. And then you also can kind of, it's a little bit hard to see in this view, but there's a hatch. Maybe you can point out, yeah, this added on shed. That's the non-historic. So we're building off of that. And then we tie into this corner down here, which is the historic building. And there was a question about the existing stairs, so I included a photo of those to the upper left. We would go ahead and take those out and kind of make a nicer interior wood stair. The second photo there is that existing tough shed that's in the back. So that would be taken down, possibly reused, but that's right at the footprint of where our addition is now, so that will be removed. And then that other image there is the utility shed that's existing, which is just to the left of those stairs as you're going in that back door. So it's, yeah, right there. So we may have to, you know, do some venting to the exterior of the building, but we're going to keep that equipment where it is. This is just demonstrating the roof plan a little bit more clear with kind of added materials as you requested, Susanna. I really, you know, kept the shed roof the same pitch as the other shed roofs that are seen already attached to this building. Again, like Patrick was saying, it was really important for us that this would kind of just go away and you could kind of focus on the main store. And that's still the first thing you see as you're driving by. We've got some elevations here. So the existing has been kind of grayed out, whereas our addition is a little bit darker. One thing that did come up that me and Patrick were discussing is we could, you know, reside that shed there that has the pallets in front of it. Because it doesn't look that great right now. So we could do something that would tie in more seamlessly with our addition. And so it makes it look like it is kind of one mass and all intentionally constructed together rather than kind of having this piecemeal situation that it is now. And then along the back, you know, most of that is already covered by a fence. There's, you know, there's a little shed roof. You can see it's there in blue. It's open on the side. We'll demo that, kind of clean that all up and enclose this area. I wanted to address the windows too. I really went with the horizontal oriented windows because that is what's existing on kind of the ice cream shop area. You can see one of those windows behind that pink little trailer there. And really, that was very much driven by kind of the plate height on that lower edge of the roof is not very high. So just wanting to have as much natural light to be able to come into that new addition, and also have those operable windows. They're just horizontal sliders, but we would do a wood sash window to match what is existing and also include the 1x4 trim that's painted in red, as you see on the historic building. You can see the windows here as well. Same proportions again as that ice cream shop, as you can see in the photo and the elevation. And there is even another one on that lower elevation, the northwest elevation, that is facing the street. So really playing off of that and creating just really expanding that customer facing area, you know, having a window that you can pass through and kind of have another kitchen, just to be able, you know, to have another spot where people can line up and get their food, or whatever that, you know, kind of turns out to be. These are a couple more details that were requested by Susanna. So I just did a basic eave detail showing that we are going to do a wood fascia to match what is existing. Just a very simple trim drip line. We're not going to do like a big gutter or anything, just kind of have a little drip edge there. And then that other section detail to the right there, the lower right, that is detailing where we're tying into the historic building. So there we'll have some flashing to make it watertight. And then as is done on the front of the building already, basically adding another piece of 1x trim there and painting it red. So it matches the condition that's happening with the shed roof that covers the patio on the front.
Whoops.
Oh.
Sorry about that.
This is just some notes about materials. We intend to match the channel siding. I've got some paint selection colors there to match what's existing, you know, retouch the existing paint if that is requested. we're going to add a couple light fixtures just at that customer facing area. They're shown on the plan as well. So I just wanted to show that here as well. Matching the asphalt shingle roof, keeping those earth tones as required, and just making it so it really ties in with what is existing.
Thanks, Lane. So I wanted to go through some of the standards, a selection of the standards of approval that Susanna has provided. The needs to be compatible with the general design, massing, and volume and scale of the historic structure. And Susanna has responded that it's a one-story addition to the rear as it is. But the application does not specify if the addition is attached to the sections of the historic building or to later additions. So we'll clarify that as Lane has already provided, the addition will generally be attached to non-historic walls with only one area of connection to historic walls. And that is indicated, I believe correctly, Lane, and tell me if I
Yes.
did it right, is in this small section, again, right in the middle of the building in the rear is where we would be attaching to historic features. As Lane has already pointed out, this hatching on this wall is a non-historic addition where the historic elements of the structure are in that lighter gray. Sorry, having a little sensitivity of my mouse. The next standard is be consistent with the town pattern and enhance the pedestrian nature of Redstone. Susanna has responded that the existing relationship to the boulevard is preserved. And generally, when we did meet something, I didn't include it, but I thought this was important that, again, what was driving our approach was that the addition will be minimally visible from the boulevard. So you're maintaining this pedestrian environment that we all know and love, and that the low profile nature of the addition will emphasize the importance of the historic resource rather than on some addition that's in the back. Again, a very utilitarian back of house type feature that we're trying to create. Standard number 3 is the project should preserve the architectural and historical integrity of any and all historic structures on the property. Susanna has provided that the proposal is adding a large addition to the rear of the building and doesn't make an effort to distinguish itself from the historic building. What we, again, have tried to do is that we want to have as minimal impact on the historic resource and the elements of the historic resource as possible. So we wanted to minimize that visibility. And as I've said, it's utilitarian and not attract attention. So again, looking at this, what we all appreciate as the general store should be the focus of the structure and of the property, and that the addition in the back just slowly kind of fades away to the back, and people won't appreciate that that's actually there. And in fact, we're cleaning up a lot of messiness that is behind there. So we're kind of unifying the construction as it sits today. Now, the question of parking has arisen, and this was not something that we addressed at all with the exemption letter, and frankly wasn't really anticipating this being a question. I do understand that the front yard is a bit unique, but I think that reflects the previous use as a gas station. The parking demand is not anticipated to increase with this addition. Again, this is an addition that supports the existing and ongoing commercial activities. The VC zoning requirements require 2 spaces for a commercial activity. And frankly, because of the nature of the general store and how it serves the community, that probably would be detrimental to the commercial use. And I had a wonderful historic image. This was an image that was in the historic inventory that was done sometime back in the 80s. And that shows that the general store being used as a gas station, and really largely kind of unchanged from that, except that the pumps are gone. And you can see that some of the non-historic additions, as Lane has pointed out, have suffered through the years. But that itself was probably taken in the maybe early, the mid 80s when the inventory was created. Concerning the topic of the dumpster, fully understand that there's a interest by the HPC to limit the visual impacts of dumpsters from the boulevard. And we really hadn't addressed that, but we would be happy to address it. And Lane and I have come up with a couple of options. Mine is probably the more easy, low-hanging fruit is to provide a trash enclosure to obscure the dumpster. And that can be done generally where the dumpster is located today. That may have, we haven't really studied it closely, that may have some issues with setbacks and whatnot. But the trash enclosure could be useful in breaking up that northern facade to try to meet the relevant guideline of a 30-foot wall length that you have instituted. Another option that Lane has come up with is that this addition could be shifted to the south, which would create what I have called the bite. It's a little area where the dumpster could be snuck into, and that would screen the dumpster, would not require an additional structure to be added in the form of a trash enclosure. And it would also serve to break up the wall, the facade wall on the north side to meet that 30-foot requirement. And here's just a very rough sketch of what it could be. The possible dumpster enclosure would be located here, which is kind of a common drive between 292 and I believe 306, which is the property to the next door to the north. Or here is an indication of how the addition could be moved, and it would create this kind of notch bite where the dumpster could be located. Lane, do you have any comments on that? I hope I represented that accurately.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was thinking, just to kind of kill two birds with one stone, to have more of a dedicated place for the dumpsters, especially since we are, I think, fairly close to that lot line on that side. And then also breaking up that 30-foot run, as you said.
Right. And there's actually some, utility. This is a driveway, so it could be an issue, but that would be certainly something that we would be happy to study. I think it's a bit out of, kind of the topic of the addition right now, but we could certainly look at that. Concerning signage, we have no additional signage that is being proposed as a part of this. Again, this is an addition to the ongoing commercial activities. So no new uses would be instituted that would require any additional signage. I think everything is adequately signed. So nothing changing in that regard. Concerning the landscaping, we are removing that one conifer, and if this addition were to change, we would likely lose a second larger tree in the back. And that's, again, as I've stated several times, that was the reason for the kind of one of the reasons for the restrained approach to the nature of the addition. Some of the guideline continues. It's unclear if the addition is attached to the historic. We have talked about this. We're only attaching the addition to a relatively small area of the historic resource on the rear, and trying to use as much of the non-historic resources to attach the addition. Now, concerning whether or not creating a clear distinction of this addition, making an addition kind of something different that would stand out. Susanna has, indicated possibly the use of an asymmetrical gabled roof, that would be similar to what is existing, but also, distinguish this addition. And then also has discussed the desire for additional separation, which I fully understand, between a non-historic addition and a historic resource. We have about 7 feet where the guidelines have specified 10. And then we go back to that topic of the 30-foot long wall length. that is being shown, and we have attempted to try to address that with what we were talking about with the dumpster, or possibly shifting the addition to the south to attain the 30-foot threshold. You know, the addition again is trying to be not to draw attention to us to itself. Utilizing an asymmetrical gable, I think, would increase the visibility of the addition and also the
Patrick, can I
impacts.
interrupt for a second?
Yes.
I guess what I was saying is that it's a gable with a side volume, not an asymmetrical roof in itself, but a composition of roof shapes, not just a single roof shape.
I
just
see.
to
Okay.
clarify that I didn't mean by that an asymmetrical gable roof, but
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, that's helpful. That's we could study that. I think, though, again, going back to how we're trying to make this the utilitarian fade into the background addition. You know, that's the type of roof that we have looked at. Also, you know, the shed roof is kind of a traditional way of adding on to miners' cabins or Victorian structures. Obviously, this being, you know, the Osgood company town, and it probably was a kit house, maybe is a little bit different. But you know, when Victorians added on, you know, to a building, it would utilize the simplest roof form that they could have, and that would be in the form of a shed. That's actually kind of what we were just talking about, is that you know, the asymmetrical layout, trying to use as simple of approach as possible, and also the fact that there are existing shed roofs, that additions have been made to this resource, and that was done in a shed form. So kind of continuing that precedent is keeping with the shed roof form. The design of the proposed roof does not complement the historic form. The roof pitch and the skylights are located in the rear 2/3 of the building. Again, as I just said, you know, the shed nature is intended to kind of mimic previous non-historic additions, and you know, thereby differentiating the additions to the historic resource. So not trying to mimic what was historically done, but maintaining something of its own time, I guess, and reflecting really the nature of the use. Concerning the windows and doors, maybe Lane, you would like to speak to this, but at greater length, because it involves the architectural design.
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it a little bit when we were looking at the elevations, but essentially I chose to do the horizontal proportion because there are existing windows that are proportioned that way, and because of that low eave, it just makes more sense to kind of have a horizontally proportioned window. However, we will tie into, you know, the existing look of the historic windows by having the wood sash, including that 1x4 trim, painted that red color to match what's existing. So it ties in quite seamlessly.
There was a question about the on-grade concrete patio, and this is a patio to the south of the addition. And again, it's just, you know, intended to increase customer amenity space, you know, with that window, I guess the walk-up window, right, Lane, and also to be as minimally invasive as possible. So just creating a bit of support to the commercial activity that's ongoing. And then, whoops, I believe this is similar discussion for you, Lane.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit in those section details that I added into the drawing set. Just that we will be adding 1x trim fascia. We'll trim out the corners as well, and paint into that red color to match the existing.
And I think that's a similar comment that we had to the decorative elements that you discussed before.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
yeah, this is essentially repeating the same about the windows, wood sash, wood trim, painted to match.
And so with that, that is the completion of our overview. I hope that gave everybody an idea of really what we're proposing. Hopefully responded to some of the questions that we had or that Susanna had, and give us a little greater opportunity to discuss this proposed addition.
So
Patrick Lane, thank you very much.
I'll keep the presentation in the background. I also have Lane's drawings
Yeah, go
available
ahead,
if we want to
Susanna.
refer back.
I just wasn't sure if you were back or not. Go ahead.
Okay. I am back, and I know it's time for questions from HPC board members to staff and or to applicant. And I do sort of wonder if because of the nature of having updated material and some updated information here this evening, if we should start with a question to you, Susanna, about are there any of the either clarifications or adjustments that have been made that would kind of change the staff memo response, or is that going to take some time to kind of process all of this after we talk about it today?
I guess my feeling overall is that while I appreciate that it's a low slung addition to the back, I kind of have the feeling that this whole design is being informed by other kind of not quite appropriate additions to the building. And while I can't boil it down to a specific guideline, I think that some restudy to kind of take it to the next level would end up with a better overall project in the long run. And so I think, discussing the individual elements of the guidelines might be a way to kind of get into that conversation. But at the same time, if you all feel comfortable with kind of the quiet shed roof back addition, I think that you are certainly, can find a way to approve that.
Okay. I know it's kind of a tricky thing to get at, because it's a lot of little pieces that seem to make up kind of, it's more about a significant body of comments maybe than any one particular thing. And then we have the specific concern about the kind of the form and the mass of the proposed addition. And I was looking at Patrick's memo, and one of the statements is that the intention is to comply with all of the requirements of the guidelines, and I see that intention is there, and I'm wondering if we're just at a little bit of it's a kind of a misalignment with some of the not only interpretation but of the intent of some of the guidelines. That might bear a little bit of refinement. I think that's kind of what you're getting at as well, Susanna.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious to Patrick and Lane, and maybe even Gina. I'm sorry, because I'm on my phone now and I can't see everybody that's here right now. Based on just the Susanna staff memo and then the thoughtful responses, which is, I really appreciate seeing those laid out kind of one at a time. It's super helpful to see. Are there things that just kind of right off the bat that you would say, either let's take this off the table or let's make an adjustment here? What I'm trying to get at is, are we talking about trying to shorten the list bit by bit and kind of go through these a little bit at a time? Or are we talking about something that's a little bit more major? And it's probably going to take some of these questions and comments, conversation to get to that. But maybe that's the first question: is there anything based on that Lane, that you and Patrick would suggest that you take a look at going forward from here? And if that feels like a loaded question as I say it out loud, so if that's not an appropriate way to go, we can also move over to the other member questions and kind of keep pushing forward.
I'd be happy to comment on that. I mean,
Okay.
I agree with everything Patrick said about this kind of being low profile. I definitely, doing a whole design overhaul with something that would mimic kind of that offset gable, I think could be a little bit more obtrusive, but I do think kind of the slide that Patrick was on where we talked about moving the addition slightly to the south, so it's set back. So we break up that one long wall, and maybe we jog out the addition somewhere else to kind of, so it's not just a box. Maybe it becomes more of an L shape or something like that. So we could kind of tweak the form of this. So it doesn't just look like it's this big chunk on the back, and it can kind of potentially go away a little bit more, and kind of lean into, that, goal that we have, that it's really just a utilitarian structure and it's meant to kind of just clean up that back area and make that somewhere where people would like to, come have an ice cream and hang out. Right now, it's a mess back there. It looks horrible. Like, it's very much just like, old stuff piled back there. And so I think it would definitely benefit to just clean it up. And I think we can make some tweaks that would really make it complement the existing building.
And to add on to that, depending on the feelings and the positions of the board, I mean, we're more than happy to accept some conditions of approval of restudy and working with Susanna to verify some things, but keeping kind of the overall approach. But maybe if we can deal with some of the smaller things, Jason, that you pointed out, through a condition approval, that I think that could be something to be useful.
Kathy, Dorothea, do you have specific questions? I'd have a couple more after this, but I want to open that up to you.
Well, I just noticed that the exterior of the whole building has a lot of things going in a lot of different directions. Like the siding goes horizontal and vertical. The windows are different shapes. So it's like, how do you wrangle that thing to make it look like cohesive somehow? I don't know, because it's like a big box stuck on the back of the building. It's not real attractive to me, but utilitarian. I don't know.
I think, as we mentioned, maybe re-siding kind of some of those old additions, cleaning those up, tying that into the scope of work with our addition could hopefully help mitigate that.
Okay. Hi. I assume I'm on.
We can hear you, Dorothea.
Yep.
Okay. These comments are not going to be in order of something that we have a different and a unique situation here in that the general store has been modified over time. And so just made to work as a gas station, as a whatever. And so we have this odd situation where we're not trying to preserve or protect the historic qualities as much as, and I don't want to try to restructure the general store to look as if it's an historic building in its proper and unique and first condition. So I just have a couple of comments here. The trees, I think, are extremely important on the boulevard. As the tree is removed, I like the effort to retain what is there and to replace the ones that have to be removed somehow. Nothing was said about wildlife. I don't know to what degree that enters into anything, Susanna, but I remember the story about Redstone having its bears and the tourist sending grandchild to go give the bear ice cream cone from the general store so she could get a picture. So I want to make sure that there's some acknowledgement that Redstone is still rather unique with its, each home had a regular bear, I think, this past season.
Dorothea, do you have any grandchildren that you're willing to send with the ice cream cone?
For the photo? No, thanks. I did buy by chance though, have a young bear walk through the yard while I was sitting having coffee one morning, and first time in 40 years, 60
Wow.
years, I guess, that we've been around here, that had happened. Didn't pay a bit of attention, looked at me and went on. There's no connection to the river there in any way. Is there any canals across and so on? And I ask that because when you talk about parking, I was on the board when the person who owned the Redstone parking lot across the way was going to put in a fast food and a gas station there to get the gas station off the boulevard. And it certainly has made a difference. And the fact that as Redstone makes known that it does have a place where you can park your vehicle and leave it and not take it to the boulevard needs to be encouraged, because that's part of the charm, is to be able to sit in the park across from the general store and have your ice cream feast. So parking and the area there are available. We know, I think the historic section that is there and will be obvious as part of the historic boulevard should be noted somehow. Brass plaque, whatever, I don't care how, but I think it can be noticed when someone says, gee, this doesn't look very historic, that yes, it has changed over time with use, and the historic section is still recognizable. And we want people to know that this is part of the integrity of this area. I think it's an opportunity for you, actually. This general store is a place that has changed more over time to have non-historic era changes to it. And I think it gives you an opportunity to say, we are maintaining the historic integrity of this very special site. And it is special. It's integral to Redstone's identity. People know about both the general store and the restaurant across the street, and they know what's old and what isn't. And I think it gives you an opportunity to say the two can blend and blend efficiently. Having one and protecting the historic quality does not mean you give up on the other uses that we have today. The backyard, for example, is very important to people who live along the boulevard and feel that that's my area to show my personality, and I'll protect the vision on the front, but I need my space in the back. And I think that this gives you an opportunity to say, this is how we can make the blends work in today's world. And I think it gives you a great opportunity to be among the first to justify the fact that, yes, we're protecting our history as special, and we're going to live in the modern era while we do it and as we use it. So I don't know what changes need to be made. I think the type and the integrity and so on, and the shape and the size and the placement and all that stuff you guys talk about with intelligence as different from me, make it sound as if I think it's possible, and I think it needs to be an ideal example where we in Pitkin County say, you want to know how to do this? Go take a look at the general store. It can work. You can have the hotel at one end and the general store that's new and meets today's standards at the other, and they can blend and work together. But we have to make sure we know what each one offers. And you've heard my chatter about, I think it's still so unique. I was there when the person wanted to, instead of putting in a parking lot to keep cars off the boulevard, wanted a fast food and a gas station. That's all Redstone needed. And we were able to avoid that and have an improvement. So I wish you well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothea.
Kathy, do you have questions?
Well, I guess one, is it possible to maintain, did you say, was that me you asked?
Oh,
Is it possible?
No, that's okay.
to
Go
maintain,
for it.
okay, to maintain the integrity and the use of the general store as a special place that meets today's needs and standards, while protecting the feeling when you go into it that, wow, It must have been a crazy way, whatever we say when we go into these historic buildings as different from January 6th. We are impressed with it and we want to protect it. And yet we have to have an opportunity to recognize it, know why it's important to protect, or else nobody's going to bother. So it's getting all late. Anyway, thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. And I think, I mean, I grew up in Carbondale. I remember taking special trips up to Redstone to come get ice cream at the general store. So it's something that's very near and dear to my heart too. And I mean, I think it's something very special that, you know, we have every intention of preserving. So.
Thank you, Lane. Kathy, do you have questions for Susanna or for Patrick or Lane?
I kind of like the offset where you tuck the dumpster in that little section on the side there. I think that's better than a big enclosure, personally speaking. Just a comment.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. Oh, one question I have, because it does seem like a lot of the driver around achieving the necessary square footage is the second spruce tree. If that spruce tree weren't there, how would you have approached the addition design differently?
Rather than having it kind of like the whole width of the existing building, we probably would have made it kind of more narrow and going back further into the lot. So it would be even less visible from the main street. But it's just so to have those old trees is so nice, and it creates such you know, a good feeling when you're back there to have trees and for things not to be clear cut. That we really wanted to preserve it. And yes, we wanted to kind of maximize the square footage that we're getting here. So we kind of compromised by removing that one tree and adding the others. But that's, Patrick, do you have anything to add to that?
No, only that, just as Lane just mentioned, that, you know, trying to keep as many trees as you possibly can. They are beautiful spruce trees. They provide so much amenity to the back. You know, it's hard to kind of look around them. I think that when you come to a site and you look at trying to do an addition, you look at all of the things that you have that are working with you and working against you, and it's really so important to try to keep as many of those trees. So I think, you know, we didn't even consider it. It's integral to the site to have as many, keep as many of those big trees as we possibly can. And as you saw, staff in our exemption, you know, echoed that. Try to keep as many trees as you possibly can, and mitigate if you can't. So I don't think we really considered anything other than working around as best we can.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And I think I saw in one of the sections that at the low end of the shed roof, the clearance is about 7 feet on the interior. Yeah, roughly speaking, is that about right?
Yeah, it's right around 7 feet. I think it's just
Okay.
below.
And was that primarily to get the total mass down, or were there other kind of functional reasons to do that?
Part of it was kind of the location of that tree, and part of it is you know, you don't want to go too low there. I still wanted to make sure that a person, you know, could have enough head height to get over there. Just wanted to keep it low profile, really.
Okay, that was really it, is just the profile of it. There's not a functional need of actually holding that roof plate low at that end. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's really driven by where we're tying into the existing building. And so, yeah, there's not a specific functionality for that 7 foot eave height at the low eave.
Got it. And it did look like, I know the existing walk-up window is fairly small and probably not functionally small in terms of, like Dorothea said, a kind of a more contemporary operation. It looks like the one that's
that's in the elevations now is actually quite large. And is that directly related to a functional need or a standard kind of walk-up window sizing? Is there a way to break that up and have it present as a vertical window by with what is it with the
Mullions?
what are the vertical
We
separations in
could
the
certainly,
window? Yeah, with the mullions or anything like that.
yeah, we could certainly explore that. It's not, a specific food service window or anything that's in there now. So I would be happy to explore kind of, something that might look a little bit nicer.
That's particularly if we're talking about shifting the location of that back mass. I like kind of divorcing it from the footprint of the width of the existing building, even including the non-historic additions. And obviously the only way to move it would be to the south. And that just is going to make that elevation a little bit more prominent. And so that window feels very important in terms of the character of the addition. In the back, I wonder if there are similar opportunities to have, recognizing that there was a specific reason that the horizontal windows were chosen, and now hearing the feedback from Susanna and the guidance of the guidelines, an opportunity to have those be smaller bays of vertical windows that might be ganged together, or again, mullions in between a larger bay that starts to make it present as a vertical window instead of horizontal.
I think that's something that can be explored, but I think it's more important to, address that on the south side that is going to be more visible, especially as you mentioned, if it gets pushed a little bit to the south. These ones, there is a big tree there, it's in the backyard. So, those aren't going to be visible from the street, but it's something that we can certainly explore. I can play with some different window patterns and see if we can get something to work there that is a little more vertically oriented.
I think for the reasons you described, I don't know how strongly I feel about that, but because it's on the backside, it's also as an amenity area, even though it's not on the right of way, it's a very public zone, and I think I like the idea of people being encouraged to spend more time back there because it's quite pleasant. So this, it will have it kind of represents the building from a public side, just not a public right of way side. Trying to think of what other questions I have. Let's see. Did you look at other footprint arrangements that would allow the addition to be less wide in total, but still preserve that second large spruce tree?
We did look at a couple adjustments. I think just wanting to kind of keep that shed roof orientation as it is. It's kind of tied into the existing building at the highest point that it can. So if we're moving too far away, then that starts to become such a low eave that it becomes not really usable space on that east side there. So I wanted to make sure that the full space is usable and it's not kind of this dead corner where, you kind of have to duck to use that space.
And I think that the functionality of the backyard, as you were just discussing, Jason, was also, something that we're concerned about. And Lane, do you recall, I know one of the site visits I had there was a trench, and there seems to be some utilities along the south side of the property. Do you recall that offhand? That could have been a constraint of where the addition would go.
I don't recall.
Okay.
We can check that with Jack too, because he was up there recently.
Right. There was some utility work. I think it was tied to a charger or something, a car charger. But also I think the big idea is to keep that backyard as open and usable as possible.
Fair, understood.
Can I jump in with something, Jason, for a sec?
please, yes.
I'm wondering, you kind of quickly mentioned maybe if we shift the north wall back a little bit to create that dumpster enclosure area, and maybe make this more of an L shape on the south. It doesn't have to pop out much, but to kind of take that floor area and make it more of an L shape running to the east, that it might give an opportunity to make a roof shape on just that southernmost section that kind of would give you the opportunity to maybe have a gable there that would then have the shed roof behind it. And that little gable would still show from the boulevard and have kind of, I think, elevate the other additions on the wraparound porch and the other things that aren't really, that are pretty mundane right now. And I think that that's a possible direction for making something that doesn't go a long way towards changing what you've already designed, but just adds enough of a piece to kind of flip it over into something that's a little more compatible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely something that I would like to explore, especially, that is the most visible face. So if we can, make it mimic that gable a little bit better, I agree with that idea for sure.
And then did you say that the food service window is intended to be an actual food service window, or you weren't sure if that was part of the functionality?
That is the intention for it to be that functionality, but the particular window that I have in there now, it's not something that was exactly selected for that. So I could certainly look at alternatives for food service windows that, could be a little bit more vertically oriented. Maybe we do something to mimic that trim on the front that kind of has a little gable in the trim, and we could kind of add some decorative elements to kind of make that face of the addition a little bit more tied into the historic elements.
I want to discourage you from the idea of mimicry, but think more about compatibility.
Okay.
So there's a dialogue, but not, not trying to take details from the Victorian, but to kind of maintain a dialogue between the elements.
Okay.
Are there any other questions before we kind of move into the next step of the conversation? We've kind of moved into a little bit of comments already. Bonnie, is there any members of the public here?
No, there are no members of the public.
All right. So I guess that puts us into we've kind of moved into board member comments. And Dorothea, Kathy, do you have things you would like to start with?
I don't have the expertise that you and Susanna have, but the idea of a gable on that south side sounds good, but I can't visualize it, so I have no idea if that would work.
Thank you, Kathy. That's more helpful than.
Good.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
That's it.
I think that comment is more helpful than you think it is. Dorothea, is there anything you wanted to add to that, or should I jump in?
Jump in.
Okay. I think there are a couple of things that are relatively easy in my mind. I recognize and appreciate that Susanna brought up some things that are not directly related to the building addition, but they're a part of the process that is important to us, that when we have an application come in, if there are things that need to be kind of cleaned up or rectified, that those are addressed. And I've seen that process serve the character of the boulevard well in recent past. On this one, as it relates to the parking, I've also seen, I understand that there's a shared driveway on the north side that creates kind of a continuous pad of gravel. Immediately south of that is what is commonly used as an outdoor group gathering area. I would consider that to be a very important part of the social contribution that the current operation of the general store is providing to the Redstone and the kind of broader community. And then I also recognize that the parking that's there now, I think it may be 2 spaces worth of cars are probably not in the right of way, but are in front of the adjoining southern neighbor's house. And so they feel connected to the general store, but they're not even fronting onto the general store's property line. And then there's maybe 2 more parking spaces that are there in front of the new electric car charger. And I just see all of those being routinely used by people who are using the park, going into the bathrooms, also patronizing the general store, and recognizing that while we don't want the boulevard to be dominated by the back ends of cars being parked, that in this particular location across from the Redstone Park parking and the parking there in front of the car charger, I think it serves an important purpose, and I wouldn't want to suggest that that should be reduced any more than it is on a busy day, even with Elk Park parking that the public is starting to learn how to use. Tourists will never really know it's there, but that is it's always full, and people park up and down the road. It certainly doesn't. It's not solving the problem, but I would hate to see that be made worse. I think that's a community contribution there. Kind of in that zone. So that's a lot of words to say that I'm fine with the parking as it is now. I'm not uncomfortable with the concrete paved kind of gathering space back towards the back of the building. I do think it serves a purpose in that commercial zone. It's in a limited kind of an area, particularly with the wood porch that's in front of it between that and the boulevard. I feel like that probably provides a level of maintainability that is reasonable back there as well. We're coming up on what's going to be a pretty nasty mud season, and in those seasons, I would kill for a concrete pad back where I park my car, so I get it. I'm not uncomfortable with that. I do think doing some of the things that I was asking leading questions about changing orientation of windows, that seems like low-hanging fruit. Like that should just be kind of tackled and taken off the list. And it's something that I like to think about and encourage in a conversation like this is what's the easy stuff, just make the easy stuff go away and comply. So I would suggest that. It sounded like, and I didn't dig into the skylights, is that because they're in the back third of the building, that they're a reasonable architectural element. And I appreciate on a low slung large roof getting some natural light makes a lot of sense. So unless I missed a staff concern on that one, I don't have a problem with it. And then it comes down to Susanna is stealing my thunder about breaking up the back of that building that my questions were trying to go at. But now we have it's kind of where Susanna went, and it's where Kathy went, and it's kind of where I'm going. And when you look at the proposed addition in plan, it is by far the single largest roof plane now on the building. And what's a little concerning to me about that is I was really wrestling with the genuine intent to reduce the visual impact of the addition by pushing the thing down low and having only 7 feet of head clearance on the inside at the east end. I absolutely understand the effort, and I really appreciate it. When you look at it in elevation, you look at it in perspective, it really does. It is subordinate in that way. But it also feels like kind of bigger moves, right? It's longer walls and kind of larger single forms. And when you think about additive architecture, and Patrick, you'd made reference to this earlier in the process, and I agree that it was really simple forms. Oftentimes, really simple forms added a little bit at a time, and that created that kind of funky interest, right? There was very rarely, if at all, a single form that was larger than any of the original kind of massing elements. And I think that's what's getting this. That's what's got me a little uncomfortable here, is that it's not dominant in its presence, it's subordinate in its presence, but it is the single largest roof plane or the single longest wall length along the back. And so where Susanna went about the kind of L shape, and Kathy was getting at as well, maybe not able to visualize, but understanding that a change in a little bit of a change in the floor plate may allow you to shift it to the south a little bit, still preserve that second spruce tree. And I agree that that is a super important goal. And then break up the form a little bit and maybe provide a south facing elevation that's a little bit more interesting than what we see in the current proposal. I think that gets the job done. And I don't necessarily think that, even though it elevates the design a little bit, to steal Susanna's words, and provides an opportunity for that conversation, I don't know that that means it's going to unduly draw attention to itself. And I think where we may be now is in an attempt to be as humble as possible, it's kind of overshot the simplicity mark to a place where it kind of stands out for its overt simplicity. And that it feels to me like we're not far off of getting to a happy medium somewhere in there. So that's kind of where I ended up. And it feels like there's an opportunity to kind of study that. And maybe that also, if that's going to be the walk-up window, in a lot of cases when it's really busy and it's too crowded to even go inside the general store at all, that becomes the place where people interface with the building. If they're getting ice cream and then going to the park and maybe not coming back, and having that feel a little bit special and a little bit related to that individual experience feels like a worthwhile exercise. So I was going back through the memo and seeing if there were other things that we needed to kind of address. I think that would check off the list, the 30-foot wall length. I was pretty concerned about the continuous wall length on the north side from a mass and scale standpoint. So if that adjustment or that study were to be done, it would address that. And I don't know, and I've said a lot. I don't know if I've missed anything else that was listed in the memo.
I just want to add, I really appreciate all of your thoughtful comments. All of you have wonderful, thoughtful comments, and it's really greatly appreciated. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course,
And
it's always hard when you want to do a good job and get the job done for your client. And I know. Go ahead.
Mention that if there is a tough shed that is being removed, that it doesn't get relocated on the site, that we need to see an actual shed design, and that needs to be brought back to the board. And then there was just another question about whether there are any floodplain concerns about this particular site. I can't remember where we are in the floodplain at this point. And then my third thing was whether or not you think you're comfortable with the gravel front. I can totally understand why that is, and I totally agree with your analysis of that, but I'm wondering if just a few little kind of containment moves might be in order, not necessarily to reduce the parking, but just give it a little bit more delineation.
Like a tire stop or something?
Or some, railroad tie curbs to separate the gravel from a grass area, or something to keep it just from migrating. I don't know. That's something that I would like to add to the study list. It doesn't have to be much. It just has to be so it's not just a free-for-all. But if the board isn't on board with that, that's fine too.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what that. I'm so accustomed to what's out there now.
Yeah.
And I can picture it as being constrained as it is now. I think about, there's some boulders there, like right around where the charging station is, and then the space behind remains gravel. And that ends up being a very significant kind of milling kind of outside space. Mm-hmm. So I understand what you're saying, because I'm usually on the other side of this conversation of, can we get less car impact and less hardscape impact on the fronts of these buildings? So I think it's worthwhile to take a look at and see if there is that low hanging fruit where it's just kind of been ad hoc for a very long time. And so it is what it is. And maybe there's a way for that to be a little bit less. So I'm on board with the idea, the philosophy for sure. I don't think I would want to try to solve that personally. That's a challenge. So what I see
I'm
on
the
your
landscape
list,
architect here, so you're giving me that challenge.
right? I'm sympathetic to that challenge.
Yeah.
So front yard parking and the dumpster location screening. You know, I guess it some of it to me on the dumpster screening, it kind of depends on how far set back that footprint would be. You know, there has to be a back of house, and having a community space behind the building, you know, that back of house has been handled with a lot of kind of the sheds and fences and things like that. And so it kind of makes sense that that north side becomes back of house. So the more that can be done to make that dumpster challenges with dumpsters migrating to the street over the case here, but it is something that's really important to me, because I think that's one of the single biggest current impacts is dumpsters having kind of moved from their hidden places up to the front of properties because the servicing companies get uncomfortable with having to deal with them. So you guys addressed the signage. We talked about windows. We talked some more about details. Susanna, you just brought up floodplain considerations. What, and maybe this has to do with the kind of evolution or next look or study of the addition itself. The mechanical equipment that's mounted on the north wall of the historic building, I recognize that's kind of in almost a cabinet, right? That's on the wall of the building, and I'm not really sure.
There's another piece that's actually close to the front of the boulevard side on the kind of small front gable. I don't have a picture of it, but it shows up. Maybe you can see it in that picture. The next slide, if you go to the next slide, there's kind of right above the dumpster in this photo. You can see there's sort of maybe it's a swamp cooler or something that's kind of right in front of that little shed roof that you can see there.
Uh-oh, what happened? I've lost it.
Yeah, you sent me another picture, which I can't find right now, of course, that shows it better, but yeah, it's sitting kind of right.
Yeah, there is like a swamp cooler or something. It looks like
and
I see
it's
some
quite near the
ducting.
front of the building, and it seemed like there's some, kind of some things like that could be addressed to just improve the overall historic character. And I don't know what the options are for that, whether that's something that could be integrated into that shed there, or if it's, going to be made obsolete by this new construction or whatever. Something just to be on your radar, I guess.
Yeah, we can certainly look into that.
That's pretty much the sum of my comments, Susanna. And so you have there's a staff recommendation to table to address some of these things. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or to continue, I mean, I'm sorry. Okay. And to the design team, do you feel like you have the kind of feedback that you need to be able to attack this thing?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would point out, I don't know how Redstone HPC often works. I mean, is any of this could we move on with a conditioned approval with understanding that that Lane and I work with Susanna as a monitor to foresee this, or do we most certainly have to come back?
I wouldn't be comfortable with doing this just at a staff level. I think, I'm happy to
Okay.
work with you in the interim, but I think that it's worth coming back to the full board. And we're
Okay.
really, like the previous application, we've pretty much zeroed in on a couple of issues that need to be addressed. So we don't need to revisit everything else.
Sure. Okay. Well, okay. Yeah. No, I think we have good feedback here. I thank everybody. Thank everybody for their thoughtful comments. It's very helpful, useful to get this clear, concise feedback. It's not always given at public hearings, so you're to be commended for that. So I guess yeah, let's look for a I don't know, continuance. Do we want to continue to a date certain? What does your scheduling look like?
Our next official meeting would be April, let's see, gotta get the right month here. April 20th. That would mean that you would need to get materials to me by the 3rd, that Monday.
Lane, how much time do you think you would need? I mean, is that
I think I can complete it by the 3rd. I will not be available on the 20th because I will be traveling. But I think after going through all of this, and as long as Patrick, you and I are on the same page, I think you could probably, attend that meeting for the both of us.
well, and I don't know. I mean, that would be kind of important for you to be there to receive feedback. I that might work, Susanna, if we have some coordination with you moving forward. Would you feel comfortable about that?
Yeah, if we want to have a interim chat about the direction that things are going in advance of that, that would be fine. And as long as I have enough information to kind of get started on my memo.
But you know what? I'm sorry. I just looked at my calendar. I'm not available on that date either.
And I don't know, since we're down to, kind of a slim board, we need to really pull the board members to see if they're
Right.
available as well. I'm not available on the 27th. If you could get your materials to me by the 27th of March, then the 13th could be a meeting date. I don't know if that works for the board.
Lane, that gives you
That works
just
for me.
essentially next week. And then the 13th.
I mean, anything's possible.
I'm out of town, but I could Zoom that evening. so-
Okay. I think that the 13th or the, end of May is really, those are the options at this point.
Well, if that's the case, then I'll make sure we get the drawings done by the 27th.
Okay.
So that'd be 3/27. Okay, great. We'll shoot for that. Let's coordinate on that, Susanna. If we run into any issues, I suppose we can pivot.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we just need to pick a date for the purpose of the public meeting, and we can work out some of the, scheduling issues if we need to.
But again, that was April 13th with materials on the 27th.
27th. Yeah.
Yep. Got it. Okay. Well, I thank you all for your time and for your service on the board. It's an important place, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the responsiveness. And Susanna, do we need to do that formally
Yes.
with a motion?
Yes.
All right, I would put forward a motion to table the current application. And do I need to put the date in there, Susanna? Is that right?
Yeah.
Does it need to be date certain?
Or continue to.
To continue to Thursday, April the 13th.
So
And I
moved.
just need a second from, thank you. All right, we have a move and we'll call that a second. And all in favor? Aye.
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 All right.
And thank you
We'll
all
see
very
this
much.
again on the 13th. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Happy St. Patrick's Day tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. We'll see you
All
soon.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Night.